decided to take his 2nd Armored Division and streak right across Germany and take Berlin. They didn't want to end the war. They wanted to prolong it as long as they could and kill as many Americans as they could, and English and Germans as well. So they prolonged the war for another 6 months, and here we carry the book, A Target Patent. And, of course, we carry all sorts of things you're not going to get elsewhere. About how they kill people. We have a 4-tape set on the murder of Martin Luther King, and James Earl Ray didn't do it. And the King family never believed that James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King. Certainly we carry a 4-tape set on Bobby Kennedy's murder. And, of course, it goes to the fact that all of the evidence shows Saran didn't do it. Now, he was certainly there, but he was standing in front of Bobby Kennedy about 3 feet, firing wildly with a gun that held 8 bullets, yet there were 13 bullets in the room, and, of course, he was shot from behind, about 1.5 inches away from behind. And, of course, this has never been brought out. We have a book on Bobby Kennedy. We have a BBC documentary that has never been allowed to be shown in the United States. They can't let the American people know that they actively kill people. We have a couple of 4-tape sets and a video on the murder of John Kennedy. There's no question this was a CIA operation. It was carried out by the Mafia. And just to show you there's no honor in the world today, there's ideas of honor, because at least the Mafia has a sense of honor. Sam Giancana was the guy who was responsible, who arranged for the murder of Kennedy at the behest of the CIA. And the CIA went around and turned around and killed Sam Giancana. There's just no honor in the world today. In fact, if you want to verify that, although we don't carry the book, you can get it on Amazon. It's a book called Double Cross. It's written by Sam's brother, Chuck Giancana, wrote the book about how they double-crossed Sam Giancana, and after he had arranged for the murder of world leaders like Diem and New and Patrice Lumumba and Trujillo and John Kennedy, how after he had done this for the CIA, and they, of course, provided the drugs for his enterprises, then the CIA turned around and killed Sam Giancana. The book, Double Cross by Chuck Giancana, and so much information that we've talked about. Most of it's available from Radio Liberty. We don't carry that book, Double Cross, but it's readily available from Amazon. So we do hope your listeners will check out the facts, get our material, and get all the information we have. Talk to people, understand reality is usually scoffed at. Illusion is usually king, because they control the media and they control our reality.
Quite right, and just so. And Dr. Monteith, I think the foremost reason why it's such a privilege for me to have you join our program today is your ability to quote and offer these very specific examples, not just these examples from the course of history, but then also the trail of research, so to speak, the breadcrumbs, where our listeners can pick up that trail and conduct more extensive research for themselves as well. And one of the names that you mentioned earlier in the program here is Jesse Ventura, how he was also made, the offer, the deal with the devil, so to speak. And I like that in his most recent release himself, 63 documents the government doesn't want you to read, folks in the listening audience, several of these exact programs and operations that Dr. Monteith has discussed thus far, you can hold the documents for some of these programs. And keep in mind, folks, we're talking about large segments of organized groups of people funded by your taxpayers' dollars. Well, no, actually that's not quite true, because all of the dollars that are funding them nowadays are borrowed. So they're not even your taxpayer dollars. They are the taxpayer dollars of your children and your children's children and grandchildren. That's what's funding these heinous operations. And Dr. Monteith, among your comments thus far, I think there's only one point that I would take umbrance with or disagreement in, and that is that your statement that there's no honor in the world. I believe that there still is. I believe that there, however, is no honor among thieves. And that's who we're represented by.
I won't quibble with you over that. Yes, I do believe they're honorable people. I believe Jesse Ventura and Alex Jones and Cindy, my friend, who turned down the $5 million from Time Warner, Daniel Estulin. There are men with honor. They're men of honor, integrity. In fact, most people are good people. I mean, there's only a small number of people on the other side. They're just very well organized, and I believe they have a little supernatural help that comes from the very pit of hell. But
they have also some
we do carry Joseph Ventura's book, 63 documents the government doesn't want you to read. That's 63 documents the government doesn't want you to read by Jesse Ventura. It's available, but 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927 or 1-800-5HIV-WAR. That's the number we used when I was writing extensively about the AIDS epidemic and the fact that we've never really tried to stop the spread of that epidemic.
Quite right, quite right. Now, Dr. Monteith, I want to make sure that we begin to connect some of the dots for the listening audience. I can already sense in my mind's eye that many people listening, cognitive dissonance has begun to kick in. Cognitive dissonance, when you're hearing information that is new to you, and when it is so radically unique or apart from what your existing paradigm is, the mind wants to try to partition that. It wants to try to get rid of that so that it doesn't have to deal with it. But we're not going to allow cognitive dissonance to be a factor for our audience. We want to connect some dots. It is chilling enough to learn about the assassinations and exterminations that are made on the small scale. But as we began our program and talked about the Georgia Guidestones, we understand that there is a very large plan in place that wants to take the world's population from its current state of over 6 billion to fewer than 1 billion, and in fact to maintain it at 500 million or below, as you discussed. And I want to try to connect some of these dots with specific examples of how they've already been conducting this work. They've laid the groundstones for decades now. I wonder if we might begin with the Tuskegee experiments. Could you help our listening audience know more about what occurred there? And we might just follow a trail of a few more examples like that to see how we get from...
Tuskegee is certainly one of the more glaring ones, but small, minuscule in scale. But basically back in 1931, why a group of public health officials recruited about 400 black men with syphilis. And the idea was they wanted to see what would happen to the black men, how syphilis would ravage their bodies and kill them. And of course, the purpose was to autopsy them. They wanted to cut open their bodies and study their organs. Now, in 1931, there was no effective treatment for syphilis. They gave mercury shots, arsenicals, but very, very questionable value. By 1941, we had penicillin, and penicillin was an excellent treatment for syphilis. So certainly they could justify recruiting these men in 1931 into this experiment. But by 1941, these men should have been treated. The program should have been discontinued. But instead of that, they had an organized effort to withhold treatment from these men, to make them think they were being treated, to lie to them and to their families so they could kill them, so they could autopsy their bodies after they died. That was the stated purpose. That was the goal. They wrote about it in medical journals. And when the men certainly moved to other areas, they did everything they could to block them from getting treated there. And this continued from 1931 until 1971. And it was at that time, and you see, doctors all across America knew about this. Every public health official knew about it because it was written up repeatedly in the scientific journals. But there was a law student, a pre-law student, and we actually have a 4-tape set on Tuskegee where we interview that law student, and he's come to be a friend of ours. And actually, he was working in the public health department in San Francisco, waiting to get his opportunity to go to law school, whereupon he heard them talking in the lunchroom about this experiment. He got some of the literature. He found out what they were doing. They were plotting to kill the 400 black men. And of course, probably a number of them, probably most of them had died by this time. Remember, the experiment had been running for 40 years at this time. And so he wrote a letter to the Centers for Disease Control and said, what you're doing is immoral. You don't have the right to kill these men. There's effective treatments for syphilis. And he got back an indignant letter from the head of the CDC who said, who are you to question us? And then, of course, the CDC got together a group of medical experts, and there was only one of them who said, this is wrong, this is morally wrong. But all the rest of them, of course, worked for the government in one branch or another. And when you work for the government, you go along, and if it means killing people, you kill them. So here, this frustrated law student, he doesn't know what to do, and he talks to people in San Francisco. Nobody will pick up the story. He meets a woman who's a reporter for the New York Times. He tells her the story, and they sense what a wonderful story it is. They run it on page 1 of the New York Times, and suddenly everybody in Washington, D.C. is horrified. Why, we would never do anything like that. We had no idea what was going on. Imagine that. And they all lied. Well, eventually, of course, they bribed the lawyers who were hired by the families of the men who died, and they got a pittance of money. I think one person was fired as a result of it, and that made up for it. They'd killed, murdered well over 300 black men. But, of course, it was because they were black, and black lives were not that important in those days, and they're still not. There is a conspiracy against the blacks today, and we could talk about how that really is operating. I mean, they're conspiring to kill off the majority of black people in our nation and throughout the world today. And so I could just, first of all, we have a wonderful 4-tape set on the Tuskegee study. It's the best thing available. It's 2 hours with the law student who wrote the case, and 2 hours with the historian who wrote the classic book on the Tuskegee study. And in many respects, he sort of sympathized with this, although he was honest and objective, and I have the greatest respect for him. He did a wonderful job on his book, Tuskegee. But we spent 2 hours with him and 2 hours with the author of the law student who wrote the case. And, of course, they went after him. They blocked him from ever being able to get a license to practice law, because when you do something like that, you are severely punished. That is, if you're allowed to live. But anyway, of course, do you want to talk about the other things they're doing to blacks today to get rid of them in large numbers?
Well, yes, I would, but maybe first, just by way of recapping, I'd like to, and I so much appreciate the depth of the experience that you bring, even to this first example, the Tuskegee experiments. But folks in the listening audience, please realize, you're talking about a program that was conducted, as Dr. Monteith said, between 1932 and 1972. It went on for
1931 and 1971, but that's okay, doesn't matter.
Sure, four decades. 4 decades. The 400 participants were recruited by the U.S. Public Health Service. That's right, the U.S. Public Health Service, funded by your taxpayer dollars. And it had to have involved, Dr. Monteith, I'm not sure if you have a sense of the scope of exactly how many people were, quote-unquote, the insiders that it required to conduct this, how many doctors and nurses, and then, of course, the folks from the U.S. Public Health Service. But in the span of 4 decades, I'm assuming we're talking at least hundreds of people who were in the know.
Thousands of people knew about it. It was published in the medical journals. It was published in the public health journals. I mean, literally everybody in the U.S. Public Health Service knew about it, and were told, if these men come into your we want to be able to autopsy them, cut them up, cut them open, look at their brains, look at their hearts. I mean, what sort of human beings would do that? Some of the people who work here at the highest levels of our own government. Go ahead.
Dr. Monteith, I hope you'll bear with me a moment. I'm having some audio troubles on my end.